Hello, welcome to the June 11th Finance Committee. I have Councilman Anderson and Councilwoman Shoup. And we're have a full agenda today, so I appreciate all the help. I do have a quick change to the agenda, if we can approve that. We've got Drew here I don't know if you're looking to speak to it, but at least we'll have some courtesy around not keeping you here through every subject. And so we'd like to move item 6, the discussion around the property tax stabilization, and move that up to ahead of item 4. So just after approval of the minutes.
I'll second that. I'll second it.
All those in favor? Okay, so the first item is the approval of the minutes from both April 30th and May 14th.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor are unanimous. Okay, so we're going to move right into the discussion on property tax stabilization.
Great. Thanks for allowing me some time before this body. I should mention at leadership yesterday, we've also identified that we'll have a full council workshop on this topic at your August meeting. We've got some other business in July. That timing, I think, will continue to work well. This is all building up to the upcoming legislative session, so I don't feel like we're losing any time in that regard. But I'm very pleased to have 15 or 20 minutes just to kind of introduce it here. I provided a little teaser last council meeting, but this goes into a bit more in depth, and I can certainly share more beyond this presentation.
For the workshop, can we make sure to extend the invite to the state delegation and to Cumberland County Commissioner, since it seems like the county is going to be involved in this?
Yeah, that's one of the pieces that's a bit open, but they would be a logical partner in terms of distributing the taxes back out based on the formula that's agreed upon. So yes, I will make certain of that. And GPCOG has already been invited and will be part of this. So very briefly, I had the pleasure of serving with 7 or 8 different communities in Greater Portland. GPCOG served as the convener. They do a great job of kind of listening to member need and interest, and kind of pulling people together to kind of work on a topic. And I was pleased to be part of that. So you see the towns of Cape Elizabeth, Durham, Harrison, North Yarmouth, Scarborough, South Portland, Standish, and Yarmouth. A good cross section, and that was done intentionally, frankly. But this work was really done with the knowledge that the state has its own conversation. There's a task force that's meeting, issued an interim report at the end of last calendar year, and I think is due to provide a final report later this year. So our work is really very intentional to be feeding into that process and that conversation that's happening. Next, please. So as I mentioned, part of our work is understanding what they're doing, and this isn't rocket science. Much of our conversation is the same that they're having. I think you'll find that we tried to put a little bit of a different twist to it, and we think that is really meaningful and might enable this to gain some traction, frankly. But the conversation isn't limited to what we'll talk about tonight. We've considered any number of things, all focused on ways to relieve burden, local property tax burden. In the end, we did settle on kind of our key policy objective was proposing a county-based local option sales tax model that really has an interesting twist in that it has a revenue sharing component of smaller communities. Local option taxes have been part of the conversation for decades, frankly, and have never been able to gain traction, in large part because I think communities found themselves being, some winners, some losers, and those sort of impediments really never let this conversation kind of get off the ground beyond conversation. So, next, please. So the other territory we've covered, again, the backdrop to all this is how do we reduce property tax burden? Talking about regionalization, there's a very active effort in Northern Cumberland County for, I think, 5 communities are actively looking at ways that they can share services as a way of reducing property tax burden on each of them. This, of course, a different funding stream altogether, like a local option or regional option sales tax. We also appreciate that expanding state funding, subsidies to help offset local expense for education. More and more jail costs are driving county budgets, which affect us. And homelessness, certainly in Greater Portland, is become an issue that is a huge expense, particularly to the larger communities, but that needs to be noticed. So there are other ways to reduce local property tax that help, in the way of the state stepping in, providing more resources to deal with some of these large challenges. And then, of course, the myriad of property tax relief programs. The state has a spotty history of property tax relief programs. We all remember just 2 short years ago, they had what seem to be a terrific, very well-received program. Unfortunately, they didn't appreciate the fiscal note associated with it. And as soon as it was in, I think the next year it was out. And unfortunately for us, you might recall that year it went out was the year we did our reval. And so our residents were seeing this double and triple whammy. We, for our purposes, I think are really a model in terms of the local property tax relief program we have. We're, I think, one of the best, if not the most beneficial or lucrative, however you want to consider it, program that I'm aware of. And we should be really proud of that. I think I've provided a cautionary note when this has come up in the past. It's gotten to the point, though, personally, I'm a bit concerned that it's now costing us about $500,000 a year to fund that program. And that's simply a redistribution of wealth. We're raising that money from other taxpayers to offset. And at some point, I think we just need to be mindful that that redistribution, we could reach a tipping point. If there's other ways to fund those programs, and that's what we're going to talk about next, that's a different animal. But I think raising it through property tax to offset other property taxes can start to get problematic, perhaps. Next. So in a nutshell, what we're proposing is a regional property tax, a countywide optional sales tax. Most of the other programs I've ever heard discussed are really local options. So each community decides for itself. And that could be really strange. South Portland has it, we don't, or vice versa. You could have people hopping the line just to avoid, theoretically, a 1% sales tax. By doing it countywide, we think that's going to kind of equalize that and remove some of that, hopping around, if you will. So essentially, it would be adding 1%. This would be done on a countywide vote, so a voter referendum. It would have to pass, obviously, at the county level. And it's really based on 2 factors. One, 65% of the sales taxes that are generated in the community stay with us. And then 35% of that gets put into a pool and distributed based on a population formula. And that redistribution, if you will, and we've done some tweaks, but I think is one of the keys, likely keys of some success, or at least receptivity. Next, please. The other provisions of this program ensure that minimum distribution, everyone gets something. For some communities, Chesapeake Island, Frye Island, there's next to no retail sales. And in fact, a couple of communities in Cumberland County, and certainly elsewhere in the state, Maine Revenue doesn't even report them because they have so little commercial activity. This program would ensure that everyone gets something, and I think that's an important part. It also ensures kind of the medium-sized communities, and you'll see in a moment that there's actually a number of communities that receive more under this model than if they kept their own. And the way the formula is currently being proposed, the larger revenue producing communities retain nearly all of the revenue that's generated for them. And the next slide will get into that in a bit more detail. This is just a quick snapshot of the GPCOG communities. We've done this statewide, so we have them all for Cumberland County and every county in the state. But you'll see there's kind of 3 different shades. There's a light green, then a darker green, and then the white. Essentially, the white ones, Scarborough being one of them, we're receiving slightly less than what we generate, 98%. It's worth noting, two of the member communities that came up with this idea get less than what they generate. And that wasn't on purpose, but I think it's meaningful. Often we have a tendency of protecting our own, but the way this worked out, two of the lead communities were actually getting a bit less than they would otherwise.
Mhm.
So the dark green are communities that receive more than they generate. And the light green is just 100%. They get exactly the same. So for Scarborough's purposes, we in town have taxable sales of about 855 million. This is in 2024 numbers. And that equates to about 8.5 million at 5%. And you'll see at 98%, it's slightly less than that, 8.4. Next. So I kind of spoke to this already, but the four communities that receive slightly less are Scarborough, South Portland, Freeport, and Portland. Not surprisingly, those are communities that I suspect generate some of the highest sales in this county, at least of this subset. Of the subset you saw on the previous slide, 10 communities receive the same as what they generate, and 8 actually receive more than they generate through this redistribution model. And again, we've done this analysis and compiled numbers for every community in every county.
When we talk about taxable sales, what are the businesses that would be taxed? Is it like lodging, restaurants?
Our proposal is for is what main sales tax currently applies to, which includes meals and lodging.
Okay.
And we appreciate that and would anticipate the hospital lobby will be interested in this proposal and probably look to have that piece removed. For us, that takes about $120 million of sales out. So rather than 855, it's 735. And of course, the effect is different for every community, but we think it's important just to kind of stay. We're not proposing any changes. It would apply to what currently main sales tax applies to. And I've got a couple slides that that might be helpful, just educating all of us on what it actually applies to currently. Next. So as was just alluded to, most essential purchases remain tax exempt under the current sales tax law in Maine, and it only applies to goods and services already subject to Maine sales tax. There's over 100 exemptions that exist, and the next slide just mentions a handful of them, but groceries, fuel and utilities, manufacturing, machinery, any number of medical items, including prescription drugs, professional services, automobile repair and legal and so on and so forth, and then a whole bunch of agricultural and aquaculture related things. And again, we're not proposing any change to that at all.
I think that's a really safe way to take away that this is in, this is out, this, just make it consistent.
Exactly. And just, I was curious, so I found out, Maine sales tax is currently 5%. Of course, famously, New Hampshire has no sales tax. Mm-hmm. For comparison, Massachusetts and Rhode Island both have 6.25% sales tax, and Connecticut is 6.35 currently. Mm-hmm. So it could be argued that at least in our peer group, Northern New England, we have the lowest sales tax. I guess they didn't report Vermont. I'm not sure where they are, but I'll be surprised if they're not close. The other thing that has come up in the past, and we spent a little time on, but we think we need to do some more research, if you will. But the research we did find, one of the very intriguing things about sales tax is that being the vacation land, we have a lot of out-of-state visitors, and it would be lovely if out-of-state visitors are helping pay some of our local bills. And, a predictable concern from the tourism industry will be more sales tax will drive tourists away. And the research that we found really doesn't substantiate that premise. And particularly when you're looking at another percent compared, and most of these folks are coming from a place that are probably paying a higher percent than we're even talking about here. It really is unfounded, at least in the research we have, that would be a deterrent and tourists would not come because of higher sales tax. Mm-hmm. But we can and should expect that will be a talking point. Not just that, but we've got to be prepared to speak to it.
Yeah. Is there sales tax now on STRs and that type of lodging?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Lodging tax, like if you're renting that was, if you remember, that was part of the discussion that
Mhm.
Scott Townsend was making, was that they collect that and remit it,
Mhm.
but it's 9%, I think.
Okay, but so that's not part of sales tax, that's a separate tax for STRs?
Yeah, and I'm not clear about STRs, but I'm pretty sure,
Income tax
Yeah.
is what he's talking
Okay.
about.
right?
So, yeah, what I'm trying to get at is like with all the STRs we have in town, would that be included in this 855 million that we do every year? Or is that like a new tax that would need to be imposed in order to?
That's a
collect
great
an
question. I don't know, but
additional-
I'll find out.
I think Karen might be right on that. You're remitting right now. I don't think you pay a sales tax and a lodging tax.
Mhm.
You know, you don't remit that
Yeah.
to the state, but so.
I'll find out. That's a good question. The next slide really just kind of speaks to the same thing. This is the kind of the research we found. Next one, Liam. Most research suggests small increases in meals and lodging tax have little effect on tourism levels. Again, this is something I think we need to really be solid on and understand what that research is and be prepared to respond, because I know it will come up,
Mhm.
and inappropriately so. I should mention just today, GPCOG authored a letter to the, I believe, presiding chair of the Real Estate Property Tax Relief Task Force. This is the one at the state level.
Mhm.
And part of this communication talked about this proposal, but it also posed three different questions and asked them to use resources that this task force has available, financial and legal and technical, with consultants. And this being one of them, really understanding the effect on tourism and particularly meals and lodging. The other one has to do with constitutionality and whether or not a constitutional change, whether this could be allowed. And that's a very predictable question, a good question that will come up and needs answers. So we're hopeful that the task force is interested enough to put some time and resources to at least know the answer to these things. Whether they ultimately embrace this and include something like this in their proposal remains to be seen. But I think this is territory that they should know answers to as well. So I think it was helpful that we're getting in front of them while they're kind of taking the summer off and their consultants are being tasked with some work, and we'd like some of this work to be what their consultants look at. So just the last slide. I did a little takeoff for what it means for Scarborough based on that 8.4 million. For us, it would allow us to reduce, we put it all toward property tax relief, reduce our tax rate by 6%. And for the average Scarborough resident, that's about $618 a year. So that's not nothing. Also considered another way, we're about to take on major debt burden with respect to the school project. As you might recall, the debt service fluctuates. It's higher at the front end and it kind of evens out at the back end. But clearly that 8.4 nearly covers some of the highest years. You know, our models suggest in the early highest years, it's about $9 million in debt service, and then it falls off considerably. And so just considered another way, we could use these resources to, we wouldn't actually do it, but it's, I think, a healthy way of looking at it. I guess I have a nagging concern, not a concern, but I will predict that some of the critics will say, well, where's the guarantee that this will go to property tax relief, that they don't trust us, that with more money, we'll spend more money.
Mhm.
And that's a fair observation. And I don't know of a way that we can actually require and demonstrate that it goes to the bottom line and provides tax relief. So that's a problem that I think we need to acknowledge and address head on, frankly.
Mhm. Could that also be something that's legislated that decides how it can be used? To your point, like 50% of it has to go towards
Perhaps there's a way.
through like you can't use it to pay for new things. It has to go to your operating
Yeah, there
budget.
might be ways to provide direct relief and we'll see how it all shakes out.
I really like the notion of using it to pay for our current property tax rebate program, but even to look at expanding that, because that
Yeah,
would be a way to make sure that people who need the relief the most would be able to get it. So like right now, I think it's $1,200,
Yes.
but our requirements are limited in scope. So we could expand those requirements to say it's not just limited to seniors, it could be limited to other people on fixed income that, you know, meet certain income thresholds so that we could do $2 million a year versus 500,000 to really help people from different backgrounds, not just seniors who, because that's what our program is limited today. It's just seniors, but we know there are people in town who are struggling to pay their bills that aren't
Seniors.
just seniors, and we don't have anything there. And I feel like, to your point earlier, like it would be expensive to continue to expand the scope, but if we had this revenue source that allows us to really use this money to target individuals who would really benefit the most from property tax relief, who can't pay for it, that feels like a really important use for communities to use this type of.
Yeah, I mean,
for.
for me, I have trust and faith in local process that, that local councils or select boards should be entrusted to make these decisions in the best interest of their communities, given their unique circumstances. It may be that there's something that the communities always wanted to do, but never had the resources to do it. And this is all of a sudden gives them that chance. So
Yeah.
it doesn't go to property tax relief, but it gets them something that they desperately want, but have never been able to afford. So I think it'd be unfortunate if there were handcuffs to the point that, that local decisions can't be made, but I just acknowledging that that is a likely criticism and an appropriate one.
Yeah,
I think I'm with John. You raised kind of the two things that I was thinking about was like, is there some way to put in writing or something that guarantees that that what we're getting back, at least we can say, is going towards property relief? It's hard for me to support something if there's nothing guaranteeing where that money's going.
Mhm.
And then I had also, with the property relief program, I 100% with you the same way. Like, I would love to be able to expand it beyond. I understand it's hard to fund.
Yeah.
But, I know we focus so much on seniors, and as we should, but I mean, I think there are other demographics within Scarborough that need that relief. One of the questions I had was the county split that you said was 65-35.
Mhm.
Is that, what was the discussion behind that? Is that, I mean, obviously they ran lots of numbers. Is that a typical?
No, nothing about this is typical. It was really designed, and we played with those percentages to come up with a model, a formula that would kind of even out the distribution and make sure everyone got something. That was a kind of a going into it, a very important premise that we were mindful of.
Right.
The mechanics of how it's collected in our minds, it would be great if main revenue simply collected the 6% for the counties that opted in and remit. In a perfect world, send that 1% to the county and let them, through a distribution model, send it out to all of us.
Yeah.
So I think we've got infrastructure in place without added cost.
Right.
to this.
And then one of the other questions I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, on this split between who's generating it versus and population, one of the things that we've done this type of analysis year after year after year. And one of the reasons we wanted to look at population is because it's only fair to say, particularly for a community like Scarborough or Portland, who has a regional draw, it's citizens in all of these smaller communities that are coming to buy things here. So we're benefiting from their citizens buying items and driving up our sales tax. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do, at least acknowledge that through putting population as a factor in there.
I think on that, Karen, too, that the chart that had the percentage generated,
Mhm.
there's only 4 communities that aren't getting at least 100% of what they generate. So that seems like a very fair outcome, is that that pretty much any community that would argue that we're generating taxes but not getting the benefit, it would only be those 4, the total benefit. It would only be those 4, and in dollars, they're pretty much the higher. So in dollars, they're getting a significant return on it, just 2% less maybe than what they could.
I think we're traumatized from the recalculation of the school funding right now. So
Yeah.
I see that and I'm like, I want everything back.
Yeah.
The last thing was you had talked about regionalization of services, which is, I think, amazing and a great idea, but I'm just kind of curious how much that really plays into this and how serious you guys are with that, like to what level of.
For it to produce meaningful tax relief, I think that's, it sounds good and it's something we should always be mindful of, but I think for it to provide meaningful tax relief, we're talking about, you know, major consolidation like countywide fire and EMS. And it's
Storm.
not just, I wouldn't put that in the camp of, you know, shared services for purposes of
Right.
efficiencies.
Another shared.
It's another revenue,
See.
that's another revenue stream. So it's part of the conversation. Is it going to provide meaningful tax relief? No,
Right.
unless it's done on a macro level, like county level. Us sharing a marine resource officer with Cape Elizabeth really isn't going to move the needle.
Well, I guess I think of, because I'm on Eco Maine now, so I like the regionalization of, I think, our trash service. I think one of the things they're trying to introduce is bringing up, you know, vendors from out of state, because if we regionalize, we can get better rates. And so I think I have that concept with trash. I'm like, what are there other places that we can do that by regionalizing and trying to decrease costs? So I was kind of curious how far that conversation had gone, really.
Well, I don't know all the towns, but it's Yarmouth, North Yarmouth, Cumberland, maybe Freeport, but they're very actively involved right now in a discussion. I don't know where it's going to end. You know, we've done our part when opportunity presents itself. You know, we've shared resources with Westbrook and currently with Cape Elizabeth, and actually on your agenda next week, we're talking about sharing a position with Old Orchard that we both save money on. But does it really reduce property tax? I can't say so.
Right.
One of the things that's not in here, but was also on slide 3, was using it for some of the county services that we have, like jails. So I don't see that in the green slide. So would the county be getting any of these revenues as well? So that way they could use it? Because I would assume anything that goes to the county is going to benefit.
They would simply be a pass-through. We might have to pay them an administrative fee, but in my mind, if we give them a formula, they receive a bulk transfer from main revenue and simply send checks out. It's not a huge lift.
Yeah.
So other than a administrative handling fee, I don't see them. No, what we were thinking of, and you're on the county budget committee, jail costs in particular, you know, those are driving up our county assessment. And so if the state can help provide more education, that reduces property tax. If it can help offset more jail costs, it reduces property tax. So those are kind of part of the conversation as well.
Okay.
We need to be very global in this discussion.
Yeah. Well, that's where I'm thinking, like, to make it more global, like the county should be listed as one of the communities in some ways to make sure that they're getting some of these funds potentially for some of those shared services, like the jail, like the district attorney's office, to make sure again that we're able to fund those, because by funding those, it would decrease
come
what
back
we
to
would
us,
get
yeah.
back as well. So it seems like there's
Yeah,
an
maybe this-
opportunity for the counties also to benefit.
And to the extent we can build a, you know, a big tent and get a lot of people under it, that's how you get things supported. So,
Yeah.
you know, we're starting the conversation here and we fully expect it's going to end somewhere else, but,
Yeah. Well, once you bring Jean Marie to the
fair enough.
workshop, you're gonna hear it. So I'm just
I
preparing you
will.
for
I
it.
appreciate your heads up. So more to come. You know, this was kind of launched just last week at the GPCOG Summit. I was able to kind of just touch on it last week, and I think other communities are going to start talking about it over the next couple of months.
Mhm.
And the goal is to seek and identify sponsors and ideally have something put forward at in the next session.
Yeah.
And to the extent that we can squirrel our way in or be part of the state task force report, we
Mhm.
would love that too, just to add kind of credibility. So we're
Yeah.
trying to be a resource to them as they're
Mhm.
wrapping up their work as well.
Is GPCOG talking to other counties as well outside of Cumberland to, again, build awareness that this is something we're advocating for?
I don't think they have yet. I think that's the next step though, is start to build awareness. You know, we certainly have a partner in MMA and the LPC process.
Okay.
LPC is an interesting little canary in the coal mine because that group represents 500 communities
Yeah.
and you often can get a statewide flavor from that composition of that group.
Mhm.
And so we've introduced this to MMA and we're waiting to kind of hear back from them just their observations, knowing that something similar has been talked about for decades.
Mhm.
Yeah, my layperson view of that would be, I think when other counties see this idea and absorb it, I would think there would be interest, not necessarily statewide, but a lot of the counties would find this attractive.
Mhm.
Tom, can you tell me a little bit about the approval process within the county? I just haven't seen a county referendum before. How does that get, is it majority of the entire county or majority by town, or how does that?
I think each town would put it on as a ballot question, and then the cumulative vote would be considered 50% plus one.
So if a
Kind of like the
community
DA.
did approve, could it still move forward and they wouldn't be a participant?
If,
If,
correct.
sorry, a single town didn't approve it, yeah.
Sure.
That they would be a participant still, they would still be
I
impacted?
think so, yes.
Mhm.
Has there been any conversation? I know you're anticipating some maybe pushback, but has there been any inclusion with the business community at all to date?
Not yet, but I think that's part of the next several months.
But are they, I'm looking at Karen, aren't they just more likely just to pass this on to consumers? Like if they're gonna,
They will, but some of them will, much like the tourism industry, they'll be concerned about, will there be price differentiation between the counties and how
Yeah.
will this affect my sales? So there's going to be some analysis that will have to be done to take into consideration the interests of the business community.
And hospitality and tourism have very well-established lobbies, so
Yeah.
we expect they will be fully engaged.
Mhm.
I would hope they also appreciate, they live here, they appreciate that we are on a collision course with tax revolt.
Yeah.
Cannot continue on this path.
Mhm.
We need to find alternative ways.
Yeah. Well, what's crazy is like, again, I know it's theoretical, but if $600 went towards property tax, that also kind of changes the bar of what's affordable in terms of housing to purchase. Cause I will say when I moved up here, I thought I could afford a much more higher amount of home, but then once I realized property taxes were a big part of that annual cost or monthly cost, I quickly went from a certain budget down by like $100,000 once you factored in the property tax, because it's just so much bigger in Maine. So while I don't foresee the cost of housing necessarily going down, if this helps people afford housing because they're not paying as much property tax, so they can pay a little bit more for a house that's hard to afford. I see it also helping from a affordability perspective to let younger people or other people be able to, buy homes that maybe are out of reach because of the property tax element.
It's a great point. We often fixate only on the fixed income kind of staying in their home. They're already established and probably
Mhm.
own their home. But you're right, I think there's an equal benefit on the front end.
Yeah. So what else do you see as like some of the headwinds here? Like we talked about clearly the tourism and hospitality groups. There might be some communities that may not want this, but like what do you see as some of the other challenges of something like this moving forward?
I think the time is ripe, because I think we're all feeling the pressure and we don't have the solutions at the local level. And the only solution we have is to spend less, and that is fraught with its own problems. So I think our timing's right, and I'm hopeful we have an audience to at least hear it out and not dead on arrival, because we simply cannot continue as we are.
Well, I'm very pleased that we have an audience in the audience that hopefully, I'd love to hear any public comments from them and like what they think about this or any of their reactions in terms of where they see potential roadblocks or pitfalls.
Sure, I'm happy to open some public comment.
Mike's on. Thank you. Drew Gattine, State Representative, representing District 126, which includes part of Scarborough. Again, I think this idea is very interesting. I think it's very encouraging. I think that there have been a lot of, in the time that I've been in the legislature, a lot of ideas about giving local communities the opportunity to generate revenue, primarily for the purposes of managing, property tax increases and other costs. I do think that one of the ways that these ideas often don't succeed or break down is because of sort of this communities looking at each other and saying, am I a winner or am I a loser in this? And I think a regionalized approach you know, certainly would overcome a lot of that. I still think, you know, sometimes those regional concerns turn into kind of like across the state. So some people might say, in my county, we wouldn't like this, so, you know, are we gonna support it if it's gonna support just other counties? But I think it's a conversation and a debate worth having. I mean, I don't think it's any surprise to tell you folks that we are gonna have a new governor next year. We're gonna have a new legislature next year. I think that the conversation about property tax relief is gonna be front and center in the legislative conversation next year. And if you listen to any of the gubernatorial forums, this topic came up, and I think you saw some real commitment by some of the candidates to doing something. You know, if you can overcome some of the possible constitutional concerns, you know, and other things which are very real. But I do think that there is strong interest in, you know, working on property tax solutions. And I think this is something that it'd be wonderful to have this in the mix, along with maybe a whole bunch of other really good ideas that I can't even speak to because I haven't even heard of yet.
Mhm.
Well, Kelly Murphy, I also represent part of Scarborough in the legislature. I will share your feelings, Karen, that nobody is more traumatized about the school funding thing than I am, but I will say this, that nobody in the state feels bad for us, you know, statewide. So I see this as a way to help ourselves. Because when you do look at the whole state, Scarborough is better off, especially with school funding and how we support schools. So any way we can alleviate that on property taxpayers, I'm all for, so.
Yeah, especially if, like, again, I think of special education in particular, like how, I know it's getting bigger everywhere, but I think Scarborough is a little bit bigger. So again, as we think about if there ever is a need to get more specific in terms of uses, like I think using it to pay for special education directly feels like a really important use that, again, while if we're not qualified to get it from the state because of the funding formula, being able to use this as a means to pay for that, knowing that every year in our budget, we're adding 12 to 15 new ed techs every year because of the incoming students. And so again, this is why this would be so helpful, is because I think it does create a little bit of an equalizer for communities like ours with the changes in the state funding formula to be able to, you know, not necessarily put it on property taxes, but still be able to pay for it with some different funds. So I think, again, this would be really helpful.
Yeah, it just occurred to me, every community has education expense, you know, whether they're a part of an RSU or
Mhm.
what have you. So if there is a concern about how the money's spent, you know, maybe a percentage of it has to be applied directly to educational expenses.
Yeah.
You know, that's something that every community has. Not every community has a public works department necessarily. So,
Yeah.
And I know that Massachusetts does that with a lot of their tax programs. They have a % of sales tax statewide that goes to education. So, I mean, I think that is an easy path that might get other towns on board that might otherwise not be. I'll also mention that special ed funding is phase 2 of the overhaul of the state school education funding formula. So we will be looking at all ideas for that in the next legislature.
Great.
I think the local flexibility on this for how you do it could be phenomenal.
Mhm.
And even as you compare the needs of large towns, small towns, you know, and that the ability for one town to be able to say, our priority is X, so
Yeah.
we're gonna apply it there, I think is versus a statewide type tax that might come with restrictions around how you spend it.
Mhm. I do think though, we got to be careful because like we're not, like to Tom's point, if the intent is property tax relief, we got to be careful not to be using it to spend on things. But what I would say is, for us, an important thing is the vulnerability assessment and all the infrastructure we need to fix to react to that. So this allows us, I'm not saying you would use all of this towards that, but if we could say, use it for 25% to advance our vulnerability assessment initiatives, so that way we're able to address climate resiliency and things like that. I think that would be an important thing. I know we're going to be talking about CIP, and we have a lot of traffic, vulnerability, things that need to get addressed. And, you know, we're not necessarily always getting the support from the state in the places we need it. I'm even thinking of the culvert that we have to do. Like, this would be like a good example of if this money came in and we could use it to just pay to fix a culvert that failed, like
Kind of feels like a grant.
emergency, yeah, like an emergency fund that we can use for these types of emergencies would
I
be
think
great.
have to be thoughtful about assuming this moved ahead of that spread over different needs.
Mhm.
So we weren't renegotiating that every year
Yeah.
based on, you know, we'd have to, I think we would set priorities about
Mhm.
property tax reduction, senior housing or senior relief, school spending, capital spending, you know, and
Yeah.
almost have a formula for that where every year we're not saying, well,
Yeah.
let's change this to 30% instead of 25.
I agree with you for that too, because again, I would think, and I think Norm, you mentioned it, was it in Tulsa? That sales tax was like, because it's, you know, touched, are tied to the economy. Like if we're in COVID or in a deep recession, we're not gonna see the same revenues. And so we would have to be careful too.
Yeah, good point.
From a planning perspective, you can't rely it's gonna be 855 every year. It could be 600 one year
Mhm.
because of a downturn. And then, so that's where you want to be very careful because you don't want residents to then be shocked a year because now we don't have as much revenue. So that's why I think communities would have to be very thoughtful and careful of how they apply this to make sure that it's, you know, not gonna shock the system if it's
Yeah.
a bad economic cycle.
Well, it will be similar kind of to the other state aid programs where those aren't guaranteed either. And so that,
Mhm.
not that this aid is coming from the state, but just the idea that it's, um, that's why I think choosing the priorities will be really important rather than identifying the dollars and putting dollar amounts against those.
It could be that state law is very prescriptive, that some portion of it
Mhm.
has to go toward X, educational, say, just because it's universal. But nothing would preclude us to have our own policy, and the remainder, this is how we choose,
Mhm.
these are our priorities.
Your own funding formula.
Yeah, and it could be changed, of course, but whether it's vulnerability or
Mhm.
whatever the case might be, or tax relief programs.
Mhm.
I think there is a little bit of a double-edged sword here. I do think when these conversations come up and, you know, I've served in different property tax relief programs over the decades, and really this conversation about how do we know it's gonna go to property tax relief? And I think it's complicated because of the way you create your budgets, and how do you know when you get some extra money or some additional money? You might put it to something, but that doesn't mean you're not then saying, okay, so now we can fund something, you know, over here. But I think that when you're trying to build, so that conversation will be part of this.
Yeah.
But also if you're trying to build consensus
Mhm.
in Augusta around something like this, you are gonna want to make sure that, you know, you're not too strict about what it can be used for, because what's attractive to the town of Scarborough might be, something else might be very attractive to the town of Dexter, or, you know,
It's hard to describe
Tri-Sport,
statewide.
or something like that, if
I
you're
just-
trying to get people interested.
Having done this for so long in so many communities, select boards and councils are so close to their people, and property tax is front of mind, and I don't care where you are.
Yeah.
I just have faith in the local process to figure out the allocation that makes sense to them, and it can change year to year. At the legislature, it probably doesn't give you much comfort,
Yeah.
but local process produces results.
I agree 80% with you, because I would prefer, like, I would like to see the state be a little bit direct, give some flexibility to municipalities, but I think of it like the TIF legislation of like certain things qualify for TIF use. And it's pretty expansive, not as expansive as I would like, but something like that, I think that kind of gives direction that says you can use it for local property tax relief programs. You can use it for school funding. You can use it, like, just give some guidance that really helps to make sure if the intent is property tax relief, it's going to places that we
And
can.
maybe a way for the legislature to articulate its priorities, right? Whether it's affordable housing or whatever the case may be, as in terms of the qualified uses.
Yeah, like even to that point, like main housing, like the way that formula is captured, like if we can use this money to show local
Mhm.
contribution instead of doing CEAs or using something like that to have money like this that can be used, I think could help us overcome a barrier, because then, as you guys know, in our town, anytime
Mhm.
the word CEA comes up, it's like a four-letter word. And so, but if it's used through this sales tax to help show local contribution to affordable projects, that would help us have a different way to fund these as opposed to CEAs.
Did you talk at all about any concern that the state would look unfavorably on this because in some ways it may handcuff their own ability to raise sales taxes? You know, where they're,
Well, again, I mean, I do think that, again, it's hard for me to say, you know, I think that there will be. I mean, property taxes go up because your expenses go up, and in the state, our budgets go up because expenses are going up, you know, and I think that, there's gonna be a lot of like I said, there's gonna be a lot of ideas kicking around next year. There'll be a lot of really good ideas about how we just try to manage our revenue so that it can support the things that we need to spend money on. I don't necessarily ever see those things as competitive with each other, because at the end of the day, I think legislature is just trying to make their communities affordable, and if they can do it state programs or local programs, it's the same thing for most people.
There might be some of that, Larry. I mean, that's probably human nature, but you know, I think it works best when there's a partnership between state and local.
true.
Mhm.
Yep.
And I say that because we've had times in fairly recent history where that partnership was broken, and it was painful. It was noticeable, and we've repaired in large part. We'll see what the next governor, how that works, but it works best. We're closest to the people. We know where the need is. We know how to address it. With all due respect, the state is so far removed from, and they're not as nimble and responsive. And so give us the resources. We'll find a way to meet our residents' needs.
Mhm.
All right, great. Do you have anything else? Karen? No, sir?
Thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, thank you. That was a good bonus for us.
Yeah.
And Tom, please pass along to those other communities, the reps who worked on all that, that we really have a lot of appreciation.
Will do. And we will have a workshop. I'll send an invite out. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that was a quick 20 minutes.
Nice.
So now we're gonna jump back to item 4 about the considering a different time frame for the long-term capital plan.
Yeah, what I provided you, the council will convene next week and have a discussion on kind of mid-year goals check-in. What I provided you here was just off the top of my head in red are, these are the financial affordability and capital planning goal, and what I think we've done and what we intend to do. I'm open for suggestions. I just tried to get the conversation started. One of these involves the 20-year capital plan, obviously.
Yeah, we've talked about it in the past that 20 years may be the modeling may get difficult and less valuable as we go, and that so I think we've just talked about it on an ad hoc basis, but I'd be okay as kind of changing that part of the goal to be a 10-year plan.
I think I'd be fine with that.
Yeah.
Even with that, those out years start to get a little squishy, just
Mhm.
inflationary numbers and
Mhm.
all sorts of external pressures. But I think we can identify kind of the projects, which is an important part of the exercise, kind of just understand that work plan and do our best to ascribe numbers and estimates to those. But
I'm curious what other towns, like, I don't feel like we're we're not alone by not having a capital plan that goes out 10 years, you know, and I'm just kind of curious how other municipalities do it. I'm just used to what we see during budget, which is like 5 years. Does anyone go 10 years? Does anyone even go 20?
10 years is the limit that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
And then that's rarefied air. There's not many communities that do that.
Right.
But I think because of all the studies we've invested in,
Right.
we've got a roadmap.
Yeah.
And so I think we're uniquely equipped to do this kind of thinking, again, to kind of identify the type of projects and the sequencing and coming up with numbers is going to be the challenging part.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
I would imagine I think when we think of this, I think we should shoot for like accuracy in the 10 years of like what we think will happen. And then some of these things though still might be like 10 plus.
Right.
So not to like
Mhm.
be overly descriptive of this is in year 13 and this is in year
Yeah.
17, like more, there are things in here that are gonna be clearly in the 1 through 5 year, the 5 through 10 year, the 10+ year. That's what I'm kind of envisioning this is.
Me
It's,
too.
it's not so much like,
Less
20
definition, yeah.
yeah, like 20 years of,
You could do the 1 through 5 individually. And you could even try to put in the items in years 6 through 10. And then maybe just do 5-year buckets after that and say
Yeah.
somewhere in this 5 years, in 15, 20 years, this we think is gonna happen. So
yeah. Like I'm thinking of like, when do we have to replace the roof of this building? Is that,
right now, it's 30 years old.
yeah, well, then maybe that's in the years 1 through 10 or 1 through 5.
Yeah.
But like things like that,
That would show in year 1 and year 20.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? We're-
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you're the roof for the brand new school that isn't built yet.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Just for comparative, in Tulsa, we had a 5-year capital plan.
Mhm.
The exception to that was the Water and the Wastewater Authority. They had a 30-year plan because the pipes are gonna last obviously a lot longer. So
Mhm.
some of those assets are more stable and long-lived. So they actually had a 30-year plan for these pipes are gonna be replaced in those years. Putting the numbers to it are the same problems we're talking about.
Mhm.
Is that?
I think it's a useful exercise. I'm actually excited about it. Just to be honest, I do fear that some of this information may be used to weaponized a bit. Because the numbers are gonna be staggering. I mean, well, if we do this accurately.
Mhm.
And I just hope, I fear that it will hamper our ability to have real conversations around things we need in the near term because of the specter and the concern of the out years. Again, it's not reason not to do this, but
Right.
I think that's gonna
it's
blow
really
back
valid.
at
I
us.
think
Yeah.
it already happens now with the 5-year plan.
I know.
Well, I think
Sure.
that's where if you show, just like we do for the 5-year plan, like some deliberate timing of things, so that way it's predictable.
Mhm.
And that we're not having major spikes, like as long as it's predictable, because at the same time, what it really matters is we're managing our debt at a load that we can pay and afford. And so if our ability to pay more goes up, that's good because we're getting in new revenues. So we may be able to, like, over the years, like, take on a little bit more debt. But to not show that we're having huge spikes every year, I think is gonna be the important piece. And then also the timing of our debt coming down
Yeah.
and up is
Part of
that,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, the way we've been able to manage that, and there's no question Scarborough, by almost any measure, carries some of the highest debt per capita.
Mhm.
But the way we've been able to manage it is that if it stays a consistent part, this is debt service, a consistent part of our operating costs
Mhm.
between 12 to 14%. There's not shocks to the system. That's kind of structurally built in. And so you're right, as we retire debt, we have the capacity to bring on more debt. School project is going to add this unique shock to the system. I think we need to kind of settle into that.
Yeah.
And then we'll get back on a more predictable cadence.
Mhm.
So that's really the key to our success is managing a consistent level of debt service.
Mhm.
And it's great if it drops off considerably, but it's kind of short-term fun. It'll pop right back up. So
Yeah.
being level and predictable is better.
Mhm.
Wonder if it makes sense to do some historical work as well to show, I mean, we have been, people are gonna say, oh, you've got $30 million coming, and we'd say, well, in the last 8 years, we also had $30 million.
Former Councilor Clucci did a lot of that historical research that identified, and that's where that 12 to 14%, I don't know that it was known at the time, but looking backward, that's kind of how it's evened out and been fairly consistent over time.
Yeah.
This is debt service as a percentage of
Right.
annual budget.
Do you envision this plan, this 10-year one, just being like true capital projects that are like large in nature, not necessarily our normal recurring replacement schedule of?
I think we'd layer that in. That's, we've got those, that's the easiest part.
Yeah.
We really know, based on our replacement cycle, where those things fall. I don't know that it's important that we tell you it's the GMC pickup we're replacing, but
No, I think it would be
do
good.
class of vehicles or equipment.
I think it'd be good to distinguish those though, because like these things are one some of them will be large one-time only projects versus this ongoing
Mhm.
replacement schedule. So that might be like its own line item or something that could be broken down so that, again, we're distinguishing between,
Well,
That-
we did the exercise with 10 million, 5 million and above, and we ended up with a handful of items on
Yeah.
the long range plan. So I think for meaningful, because I think I'm gonna be the one that ends up doing this.
so do whatever you want, Norm.
That's a fair assumption, Norm.
I think for meaningfulness, I think we need to include those annual items, just to get a sense of what we're spending.
Yeah.
On capital items.
Well, and that has some transparency around it too, you know,
Yeah.
where it doesn't appear we're leaving things out to make it
Mhm,
look
that's true.
rosier. I think I'm interested in this, we've done all this work on the vulnerability study and these plans that are listed here, the transportation, parks and facilities, open space, all those things. But it seems like there's not a concrete plan around priorities and spending and all associated with each of those. There may be in general to each plan, but I think that would be important to kind of, as you have the plan, is kind of tying it back to these specific.
Mhm.
That could be phase 2 of the plan is, develop the bone structure, what we think we're gonna do in the next 10 years. And then we reconvene and put some priorities on the items.
Yeah, I think it came up at a couple of times at the table for on election day that when we were talking voters and particularly around the vulnerability study, it came up today when at the table we were at about, we've got that first look of 30 streets that are at risk and like starting to prioritize and put a dollar figure against those.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, the comment was, spend money to save money in the future, but harden those assets.
Mhm.
So
What's the timeline for when something might be drafted for this?
we're working on the premise that we have it by the year end.
By the calendar year end or council year end?
I was thinking calendar, but you might be more interested in council.
I can live with.
We could bring you back for a small
No.
meeting.
I'm fine.
Calendar year.
All right, the next one is a little, I probably want to address that with our goal was to work towards a 0% mill rate. Obviously, that didn't happen. We pivoted along the way and, but I think Tom's comment here is right. We didn't meet that specific target, but the goal of spending restraint was achieved and the outcome was a compromise. I think that just by the referendum vote the other day, it was kind of validated that it was widely acceptable by the community.
Incidentally, I'll share this document out and I'm pleased to have all of you contribute. So I just wanted to get the conversation started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think defer any major capital projects, like when we talk about this 10-year CIP, like where do the community center and the library expansion belong? And again, at the tabling, somebody came up to me and was like, when is that community center going to get done? And they were part of the committee. And I know it was $80 million that was proposed by the committee at the time. And I feel like that's probably too high, but we do need to figure out, or at least put that on here somewhere. And is it in the 5-year one or is it the 5-year plus column? Because I think that sets an expectation, at least for like where this council sits in terms of where they want it to be. So I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that, because I think that's going to be something that they're going to have to do from a.
Yeah, I mean, you all know I want a community center, but I feel like putting that within the 5-year plan with the impact of the school coming would not
Yeah.
be favorable for us.
I think that's going to be this whole exercise, right?
Yeah.
Is those big items that are not, I don't want to characterize it this way, but they're nice to haves a little bit, or I should say undefined of when to have, maybe
Yeah.
the better way to say it.
Define when to have.
Compared to some of the vulnerability things.
Yeah.
And so I'm not quite sure how you address that, or is it is it again, it's gonna be perceived that we're not being thoughtful about it if you just kind of say, here's another bucket of things that need to be addressed in the future. You know, the whole idea of the plan is to
Yeah.
get your arms around it.
I think though, the concept of must-haves, should-haves, could-haves is a good way to
Yes.
think about this too, though.
Mhm.
Like we should, for each item, be clear on like, again, vulnerability assessment, to me, all those things feel like must-haves that need to happen. Transportation, there's
Mhm.
probably some musts and shoulds. Parks and facilities is probably shoulds and could, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's
Mhm.
different ways to look at these too, so that we can say, like, are we putting all the musts in the right places in the right time? Are we? And again, that to me kind of helps with the timing of when. And again, if there's a burning platform, or if the residents, like, the residents can always tell the council, we really want a community center on the ballot. Like, we want it. We want the opportunity to vote on it. So to me, this is an exercise of at least trying to show some level of prioritization and timing. But again, the community can always come for the coulds and
Mhm.
say, we're ready, we want it, put it on the ballot.
This is really challenging
Yeah.
because I think about both those projects, the community center and the library. I can picture both of those coming back with completely different proposals than
Yeah.
what was originally envisioned. And the library, I think their scope right now is a reduced
Yeah.
scope project that they haven't gotten far enough with a plan, but so I'm not quite, I don't know how you pick the value to put them on there.
And where to put them. You know, for external groups like the library, they'll be very interested in potentially disappointed where they fall in the
Yeah,
calendar.
yeah.
Community center though, like there's no organization saying, I want a community
Right.
center.
Yeah.
So to me, like, we got an email with a resident being like, we're never gonna be able to fund a community center by ourselves. So if we
Yeah.
put it 20 years out, is that us sending a message? We cannot afford a community center.
Yeah, I think.
I mean,
it-
I want the message that we can't do it ourselves.
Yeah.
So like, we need people, like, I know we did that work group and that was wonderful, but like, we can't fund it. So when I think about that, I actually want to, I want to put it 20 years out and be like, Scarborough, we need help because we can't do this ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a,
As much as I want it, I think
Yeah.
we're never.
Karen,
gonna be able to do
that, as you know, that's the problem. There's no sustained
Yeah.
effort there.
Yeah, no, and that's what's so hard.
And library has, you know, it's a constant drumbeat. There's a,
It is, and part of their problem is they need a place for teens and the place for seniors, so it is
Yeah.
a community center issue within itself.
Yeah.
Like, I would love to put a senior center on there in the next 10 years and a teen center on the next 10
Mm.
years. Can we just do that instead of a community center?
I think that's actually not a bad way to look at it from and I was talking to some residents at the library too, or not at the election, where they were like, we should look at it more modular, where it's like,
Yes.
build an aquatics facility, build a senior center off of it, build this thing. Like, once you have the land, if you have enough land, you can over time expand. Again, that makes each of those expansions more expensive over time.
Yeah.
But again, if we put items like that on there that show these are contemplated and it's all part of like this community centered concept, I think that's a better way to show it. And then maybe it forces different conversations in the community of like, we really want a pool. Like, let's start with an aquatics facility, get a pool in Scarborough, and you know, if that's $20 million, that's more feasible than $80 million all at once.
but this discussion demonstrates the difficulty in doing that.
Yeah,
In doing this exercise. I mean, some of it's fairly routine, but these other sorts of things, wants, if you will, are an important part of the conversation, but I don't know that you want me making the decision where they all fall, at least to start the conversation. I'd like, maybe I'll turn some of that back to you to help fill in those pieces.
it could be not in the 10-year, but in the plan as like something that needs to be contemplated for future inclusion in the plan.
Just a placeholder, maybe without the dollars.
I think dollars are important, like, and dollars meaning like, it doesn't have to be precise, but like some things, if we know it's like 10 million versus 50 million,
Right.
like, we need to know the range. But I would think things like the community center, maybe, like, again, aren't in, what I'm envisioning is this 10-year document, but it's in the document as like here are other things to be contemplated that
We can
that
capture
aren't
those.
in here.
Then, and maybe it is as a range,
Yeah,
that either you have buckets of ranges and say which things fit in those buckets, or you do it by the project and assign a range of dollars to it. Yeah.
I can tell you the library, they don't have a definite plan, but they would be very disappointed if their project is not somewhere, certainly within 10 years. My guess is
Right.
probably within 5 is their expectation.
Mhm.
If you're willing to do some work with us, we can certainly capture kind of all these things that need further conversation. None of us have the answer. I think
Yeah.
it needs to be kind of collectively worked through.
Yeah.
On the sheet here, you have East Grand Ave project deferred. Are we just acknowledging that that was deferred? Is there a conversation about that?
I think
When it comes to capital projects, I just thought it was noteworthy. It was unique that the council deferred. It was a $4 million project, so I thought it was worth noting.
Well, no, and that's, I think one of the questions I had coming into this meeting tonight was what is the next steps for the two things that we deferred? I don't know if that's the appropriate time for this.
We should talk about it.
Because I feel like with the East Grand Ave project, all the feedback we've gotten is we need new sidewalks. We need new sidewalks, not we need you to revamp our whole thing. So I'm kind of curious if there's any appetite or discussion around not doing the full project and just doing sidewalks.
Yeah, I've started that discussion at the staff level. Just the sidewalk that we've invested a lot in engineering. The survey, some of it can be used, but there's also some additional design work if we just do sidewalk alone.
Right.
Apparently, one of the big problems there is that there are all sorts of private improvements, flower beds, fences, you name it, well within a right of way. And even an inch or two difference in terms of elevation will cause drainage issues. And so it's not as simple as, oh, we'll just wipe these pieces and not do these things and we'll just do the sidewalk. There's some redesign that has to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think staff is actively thinking about and come back with some alternatives that are lesser.
And then more important to me, I'm kind of curious what's going on with the cemetery that we deferred, and what you envision that to do. Cause I made it clear I don't want it there at all, but I'm just one person. So what are they gonna explore other options?
It's like Karen, I haven't had two times to think about it. East Grand has been on mine because a lot of folks have been asking about it, but I haven't given the cemetery a second
Well,
thought.
hopefully I'll see Doug next week at our Eco Main. And
Yep.
I'll sit next to him.
I think the next step that I had for the East Grand was, because I wasn't necessarily saying, don't spend that money, but so if we can do a reduced scale, something on East Grand, what would be the next priority for, and it doesn't have to be the exact dollars, but I just want us to start looking at other projects that might benefit a larger swath of town, whether it's just doing shoulder work to improve bike lanes or something and pick some roads to do it. But so I think that's what I had. I don't think staff's gotten to that point yet, but I was saying, what would scale down for East Grand look like? What else could we do with those funds?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
like
I think that would be good. I don't know if it's the finance committee that would look at that, but as you said, Tom, like for staff to show options of just doing the sidewalks. We know what the option was that was proposed. Is there something in the middle? And what do those costs look like? And then I think to your point, as we look at the CIP, we should really say, given what this is compared to other must-haves, should-haves. I think the residents feel for a sidewalk perspective, it's a must-have. But again, it's a small portion of part of the community. And if there's other sidewalks in other places that are more walkable, more connected to other parts of town, then that's where I think you start to say, well, maybe not in 28, maybe in 30, because we really want to do this one first, because it's going to have more benefit to the general population. So again, I think that's where, once we know the option, that's one thing, but then where does that option sit relative to other competing projects?
Yeah, and I think deferring this goal that we had of deferring the major capital projects, I don't think that was a difficult goal necessarily, but we certainly met that. I think there could be a conversation around the communications upgrade. Tom, when do we hear on we kind of have to pass it to find out if the funding is there from?
Yeah, we are pursuing a couple of different leads. These would have private money build the towers, which would be a significant savings on the budget. as opposed to us building, owning, and then leasing it to them. So just kind of flipping that. It's potentially millions of dollars of difference. Just got a legal opinion today that can happen under our current tower ordinance, that approach. So, yeah, we're extremely mindful that we need to report back to you by late July. And that's the decision. That's the decision point, whether you want to put it on the ballot in November. But we're not going to hear on the CDS money from the congressionally designated spending, or the other grant, as I recall. Right.
I remember you commenting that a lot of the congressional support, they kind of want the local approval to have already happened.
They
before
want to
they
be the last money in, to be the heroes rather than the first money, without, and honestly, without, when they do that, very often the project doesn't go and it just sits there and it's not put to action. So I get that. I do.
Is there more of a communication campaign out to the public on this before we make the decision, just to understand where the public kind of sits?
Yeah, it's underway. I know that Allison's meeting with the chiefs, I think early next week, to start rolling that out well in advance of you actually having to be at a decision point.
Mhm.
So we'll model it after the last public safety referendum, the body cams. If you recall, there's a pretty decent PR and public education campaign. So we'll
Yeah.
do this, follow the same model.
I know they're planning on being at the National Night Out, which is a big event down here in Memorial Park.
Mhm.
They intend to be fully prepared to discuss and educate on that project.
What about at Summerfest? Are they gonna be there?
I'm sure. I think National Night Out is first. That's the only
Okay.
reason I mention it, but I'm sure they'll be everywhere they can be.
Mhm.
Right?
Well, because again, for us, like it's not whether we support it or not personally, it's really, has the work been justified to put it on the ballot, is what we're voting on. So it's not necessarily, do I like it? Do I want to pay for it? It's more,
Yeah, and the real trick is gonna be, what is the question? You know, what, you need to ask for enough to actually do the project,
Yeah.
but you don't want to ask for any more than you need, and that's the dilemma that we're facing right now, so.
On this one, that'll be difficult because of the opportunities that'll come in late, you know.
would it,
There's also an option of securing some level of funding and then taking the chance that other funding's gonna come in and get us there.
That's interesting.
And that might be what we end up having to do.
Mhm.
And maybe that forces a scaled down project, if no other money comes in, or we're able to actually do it, you know, sometime later.
or you could go to referendum again in June if you needed to make up the difference, right?
Mhm.
If it was really needed.
True. So
Tough optics on that.
we'll
Yeah.
be prepared in 6 weeks or so to have a more thorough discussion there.
Mhm. Okay.
Good with that?
Yep.
All right, number 5 is the school project. I would just want to add something to this that came up from people asking me questions. I presented this as a waiver of the impact fees. And it's technically not a waiver because planning board does not have approval on this. There's no need to, the impact fees never would have been assessed because they're not doing that. So that caused some confusion with people that we were waiving the fee, and doesn't it just mean that the costs are being paid somewhere else? And I think the way I try to explain it is, in the school budget, there was a line item for impact fees. There's also a line item for off-site improvements.
Mhm.
And so taking out the line for impact fees doesn't necessarily mean that the town's just paying for it instead of being under the school budget. So it's those off-site traffic improvements or building improvements would be the line item that paid for improvements that had to happen. It never would have really come from
Mhm.
the impact fee fund.
I think that's true in some, if not large part, but I suspect impact fees would reach a bit further than that. The traffic models are undoubtedly going to suggest impacts pretty far afield from the school site. So
Mm.
I think there's going to be some impact that's not addressed by way of even those offsites.
Right. Well, and that's what I did have that caveat in there,
Yeah.
that there's a budget line for it, but I don't know if it's enough. And, but either way, the end result of that is, if there's those extra expenses, we would have either had the school pay the impact fees and use that money towards it, or we're gonna pay
Mhm.
for them out of town funding and school funding, I guess. But So at any rate, I just wanted to maybe change the language on that a little bit, that it's not really a waiver and doesn't need to be.
And frankly, the traffic impact fee ordinance doesn't give the council the ability to waive.
Right.
So if that's something you'd like, we need to probably modify and give you that authority.
Mm. For even other projects.
Yeah, and I don't know what the scenario is where you'd consider waiving it, but right now there's no process for you to do that. And they are assessed by the planning board at planning board time.
I would want, if we were gonna entertain that, I'd probably say it needs to be pretty tight language, or every developer that comes through is gonna ask for a waiver.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to.
I agree. Let's not open Pandora's box. So you ready for a light topic?
Sure, for the last month or so.
We see this as maybe the first of, could be multiple discussions, and this is something that has been talked about and desired for a long time in terms of being more specific and exact around the so-called, shelter benefits of TIFs. And Karen, to her credit, finally rolled up her sleeves and has done the math.
Right. And just to be clear, Tom and I did this presentation this morning to my board. And so I know, it was just this morning, wasn't it? It's all right, I have a summary for you. Anyway, so I freely invite Tom to, yes, Tom to join in whenever he feels necessary. So we do want to talk about tax increment financing districts, but a very narrow slice of TIFs. We're going to talk about the shift benefit analysis. And so with this presentation, I'm going to do a quick review of what that shift benefit is and a quick look at how valuation affects different funding formulas. And then a preliminary look at FY 2027. Just a note, we can't complete the 2027 analysis until after commitment, when all the numbers are finalized. And then, we really wanted to look at last year's numbers and, continue to do this analysis each year into the future. Last year was the first year we did it. We went back 2 years. So this adds a third year to this particular analysis. So again, we're going to focus on just this one narrow sliver of the TIF discussion. So a benefit is created in a TIF as designed by state law. Really what it's doing is saying the state formulas that benefit us, like school funding formula, the county tax, and the revenue sharing, all use valuation as part of that formulation in terms of how to get the results. The assumption is that valuation indicates, a higher valuation indicates a wealthier community. And the secondary assumption is the wealthier the community, the less funds you need from different sources of funding. And so the TIF district, one of the things that the state does is say, well, this is an economic development program. We want to give you a tool where you can save some money in a couple of different ways. And really, we want to defer adding valuation to the funding formulas. And that's really essentially what the shift is. And so next one.
Just, John, you might recall, former councilor John Clucci used to say that there's a growth tax. There's actually a disincentive to build your value in town. And this is a way of kind of red circling or isolating new value created within a TIF. So those negative consequences don't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the key factors in all of this is what's called state valuation. And the state valuation is what the state comes in. It audits our, analysis, the analysis of the assessor, and it computes what's called an equalized valuation, so that valuation across all different communities are computed in exactly the same way. One of the things that the state valuation does is if you have value captured in a TIF, it takes that value out. So your state valuation is already, if you're looking at the numbers, it already has all the valuation that is protected in a TIF district taken out.
And that equalization exercise is really important, as you can appreciate, with communities that have not revalued for 10+ years. Their assessed values can be 7% or less of market. And so they're, by virtue of that, they're undervaluing. And so the state says, nope, we've done this ratio analysis and we need to add, equalize you to a higher percentage, closer to 100.
Is that partially what could have hurt us this year with the school? Because I think this was the year that the reval was probably used in the state formula, right? So
This is what we're going to talk about. It's too soon for the current one to affect you, and it's because of the way this state valuation, which is 2 years behind.
yeah, but we did the reval 2 years ago. So in this year's funding formula, was it 3 years?
Well, unfortunately, let me just go ahead and advance to that so you can see the difference. If you go here, you can look at this under the school funding formula. This formula uses a 3-year state average of the state valuation. And so they're using FY 21, 22, and 23. So it's missing.
It's a 3-year average, but the most recent year is 2 years old.
Correct. Like I said, it's a little bit of time travel here. It's very confusing at times when you're looking at this. So you don't want to get confused between the state valuation year, which is 2026, but it's based on 4/1/24 town valuation wise. And so the school funding formula has a bunch of other stuff in it, but we're only interested in valuation at this point. Revenue sharing formula, they actually use state valuation for 2026. I don't know why the school valuation doesn't use 2026. I don't have any explanation for that. And so this revenue sharing formula, it's up to date on state valuation, but it's still 2 years old in terms of the value that is happening at the community. And the reason that's really important to us right now is because of the valuation that's being created at the Downs. And so in 2023, 2022, they're just starting to begin to generate a lot of value in the system. So in the next couple of years, you're going to see more and more value created in the school funding formula and the revenue sharing funding formula. County tax is the same thing. They're using FY 2026, again, based on 4/1/2024. So now that everybody is confused about which year everything matches, Nick and I spent a long time doing a table that lays everything out so that we couldn't mess up what numbers we were pulling in. So again, this is like estimates and time travel. The state formulas use the state valuation municipalities. State valuation is 2-year time delay. State valuation for 2026 is 4/1/24. And the benefit calculated for that CAV is from 2 years ago. But when we do this calculation, we're focusing on the current year and we're focusing on what we're receiving this year, which is different. We're not trying to go back and say, hey, this value is from 2024 and we're going to go back and look at 2024 impacts. No, we receive it this year. Does that make sense? Okay. And this is where we have 2 questions on TIFs with respect to this shift benefit. We're focusing on the left-hand arrow, which is the impact of all the TIF districts estimated for the current fiscal year. The other impact, which is the one that's often seen or always seen in the TIF applications, that's a 30-year projection. And what they do is they use one number, which is probably about 50% right now, but they're using that 50% on average for the 30 years. but that's not what we're receiving this year, and that's what we're interested in. So at some point, just we would expect if we're receiving less now, 5 years from now, we're going to be receiving more in terms of that percentage. It's going to grow. So let's look at the next slide. And now this is the actual calculations that are being done. For fiscal year 2027, I'm able to calculate what the shift is, but I can't tell you what that percentage is in relationship to fiscal year 2027. That's why we have to wait for the, commitment. But we can see that there's a progression looking at from fiscal year 2025, we received just under $1 million. We're 1.5 last year, and now we're up to 2.2. And so just as a review, the only thing, we can go to the next slide. The only thing we're doing, we're not changing anything else about the funding formulas except the valuation. And what I'm doing is going back and saying, if state valuation takes out the TIF funding, I want to put it back in. And if we put it back in, that would be as if we did not have a TIF. And so that's the change that I'm looking at from including the valuation versus not including the valuation.
So that equals the value of the benefit?
Yes. And so the next slide, I ran these numbers so we could look at fiscal year 2026 because we have all the numbers for 2026. So the captured assessed value for 2026 was $605 million. So the property tax revenues on that was about $6.9 million. We paid out in CEA payments $1.9 million. The shelter impact was $1.5 million. And so the percent of the CEA that was covered was 1.5 million. And if we divide that by the total that we paid, the shift is covering 81% of that bill. And so the net cost of all the CEAs was the 1.89 minus the 1.5. So we essentially paid $363,000. But we remember, we bought services for those things. We bought infrastructure at the downs. We bought affordable housing. We participated in that. And again, the CEA equaled 1.5 million, but we're getting back through these funding formula benefits 1.5 million. So we're paying about 20% of the cost of the CEA. And so you can look at that as, the net percentage that we're paying was 19%. Mm-hmm. And we benefited about 80%. And so that's the piece that I wanted to work through, and I'm working through for me as well as I'm putting all these numbers together. And it's 1.5 million that we're getting back in various forms, although always we want to point out, nobody's writing us a check. That's not what's happening. Nobody's writing a check. But for the value sheltered, we would be getting $1.5 million less in various ways, either less funding through the state education formula, or from revenue sharing, or in terms of the county tax, our tax would go up. So again, you're not getting a check, but you are getting those benefits, and that's why we wanted to calculate the actual impact of those benefits.
So in the analysis, Liam, this slide, please.
So basically what you're sharing is why PIFs and CAs exist, especially for economic development, because
Correct.
the purpose is, while we may need to provide money to industry to help jumpstart economic development, by shielding that revenue, it's giving the town a benefit. Again, it's not fully covering, in the case of Scarborough today, the full cost of the CEA, but the fact that based on the data, 81% of this economic development that we're trying to generate through the CEA is being paid for by the benefit.
Right. And remember, this is also including the affordable housing tips as
Yeah.
well.
Mhm.
So it's all tips. We didn't try to break them out. Yeah, and depending on what happens next year, and that's one thing, there's always a caveat. The formulas change every year in terms of how much the state decides to set aside for revenue sharing, how much, what the mill rate that the state sets for funding the schools is. All of that changes every year, which is why it's sometimes a little crazy in terms of trying to track it. But we should start to see some fairly significant increases in that benefit simply because
Mhm.
more and more value is being captured in
Yeah.
the next few years.
So in the budget right now, or the budget we approved, it looked like almost 2 million was proposed in total CEA payments, but you're projecting 2.2.
Yep.
So next year, we would technically have a surplus that we otherwise wouldn't have if we didn't have.
Correct, although I'm waiting because I want to wait for commitment.
Yeah.
Right.
Had a long conversation with our assessor, and she feels very strongly about
Yeah.
commitment. So that's why we didn't run those numbers this
Mhm.
time.
So with all the caveats that Karen's provided in terms of the formulas changing, what my takeaway, kind of looking right to left on this sheet, whether it's the dollars for sheltering or the percentage at the bottom, we're showing this upward trajectory as value continues to be created. We can reasonably expect that the shelter benefit will increase commensurately.
Mhm.
And that percentage will increase. For those that have kind of followed this for some time, our consultants and attorneys used to talk about like 58% shelter benefit. And I think, as Karen mentioned, that's looking out over a 30-year period and kind of averaging what that percentage is.
Mhm.
And we may get to that, but at the early years, while you're kind of building, you're starting at these lower numbers.
Mhm.
And I will say that the projection takes, the existing year, the last couple of years, and does an average and it projects that over 30 years. Certainly something I've done in various forms before in terms of trying to project out, but these are much more concrete numbers that we're looking at right here. And that's why you see 22% for fiscal year 2026.
And I just want to be clear, the shelter benefit accrues from the existence of a TIF. CEA is separate apart, it kind of layers on top, and I think it's the elephant in the room, and so it's important to talk about it, but the shelter benefit exists and will accrue to us regardless of whether we choose to share
Mhm.
any of those TIF dollars to another entity.
But
Correct.
being able to say that the shelter benefit is covering the cost of CEAs.
Agreed. I think it's really helpful.
Helpful data point.
Right.
So Karen made the point a couple times that we're not writing checks, even with CEAs, we're not writing, I guess, we're simply rebating money they gave us. It's not like we're paying money out of someone else's pocket. It's returning a portion of
Right.
dollars they paid to us.
But so right this minute, it's correct to say that the sheltered benefit is covering 81% of the cost of, I don't know if you call it cost really, but of the CEA.
In
Yes.
fiscal year 2026.
All
Right.
CEAs combined.
But the expectation would be that will flip eventually and will cover more than the
Right.
Seems
CEA.
to suggest that,
Yeah.
yep. And that's why in some communities, I talked to my colleagues in Westbrook, and I think they look a little too simply at it, but Rockborough has an 80%.
Yep.
And
80% CEA.
Yes, they do.
80% CEA, and that was thrown in our face and held up as an example because that was in place before we were sitting down with the Downs. And in spite of what some people think, I think we drove a pretty hard bargain at 40%, given what the comparative things were. But the philosophy in Westbrook is simply, the shelter benefit covers the CA costs. And, I think it's just a broad statement, but they have adopted that philosophy, and that's how they view these things.
Mm.
I don't think they do this level of analysis. I'm not faulting them for it.
But at least we can say it almost is, and
It is.
likely next year it should.
Yeah.
And then it'll only cover more of it, I'm guessing, because in terms of the Downs, which is the biggest CEA payout, like is their payout gonna continue to increase?
No, it's always, it's 40% for the next 20 years, or
Yeah, it's more,
15
it will
years.
increase as more value is created, more taxes are paid, the rebate will.
the rate doesn't change.
Right. But the dollars will change.
But the benefit of the TIF should also be going up as well.
Right. I
All
think, this-
things being equal, you know.
yeah, I think it's reasonable to assume that at some point will be, this will flip
Mhm.
and be totally covering it and then some.
This would change, though, the benefit if we ever moved from being 100% capture, right?
Correct, and that's why in fiscal year 2025, we were not at 100%.
Yeah.
So we had to go back and look at how that affected the CAV. So we had to calculate that in.
Mhm.
So all of that is factored into this analysis. But for this year, for last year and this year, should be 100%.
I think
Tom,
it's- Go ahead.
I was gonna say, are we getting to the point where we don't have enough
The
stuff?
parts
to
are
spend?
good, but I can predict in the next 5 years, I think that will be a discussion we have to have.
About changing the capture value?
It's a brave new world, though. I think all the vulnerability stuff, I think we can make a very good argument that we can qualify. So it may be that we have a long run. And ideally, I'd love to be able to cover some school-related
Yeah.
capital costs. It seems only reasonable. The state's not going to pay us a dime for new school.
Yeah.
Allow us to use our local resources to
Yeah.
offset the cost.
That was one of my suggestions to the legislature
Right.
as well. Like when we talked to them about the regional option sales tax, we should say expand our TIF uses to like be more clear that they can cover. Like if vulnerability is covered, great, but even some of these transportation ones, are they all covered?
The envi-
Transportation is very broad.
Right.
Vulnerability,
Infrastructure.
that word isn't there, but environmental infrastructure, stormwater. So I think we can make a case. It would be great to have some clarity,
Yeah.
frankly. And at some point, I'm preparing for the state to come in and audit how we're using TIF funds. No one ever has. But I think it's only reasonable to expect that they will. And our taxpayers, I think, need to know that we're complying with state law. So we're keeping pretty scrupulous notes in terms of what we're proposing to use TIF funds for.
Mhm.
I think there's also an opportunity to use this information to show what it would look like to define a TIF district that doesn't necessarily have a CEA.
Correct.
Which we've talked about a little bit, that as, you know, opportunities in town that have potential for development, that you don't necessarily have to issue a CEA against it, but having it defined in advance as a TIF district would
Mhm.
capture this.
Tried to do that in Dunstan, but I think it was complicated by the fact that the conversation started with the CEA, then that CEA went away
Yeah.
and there's a number of
Well, it's
factors.
conflated with the
Well, I
one
think-
project as well.
I think it should be an important discussion, especially as we talked about for rate of growth. If there are true
Mhm.
growth areas we want to target, part of that conversation should be, if it's not in a TIF district today, which most of it is, I think if we said
Mhm.
Oak Hill and the Downs.
Right,
The
Downs
question
and
was Dunstan, which I think even we were debating, Karen, you weren't here, but we were kind of debating, given the poor traffic infrastructure in Dunstan right now, do we want to make that a different rate of growth district that is slower? Because even though there's probably more new developable land there, we may not want to develop fast until the infrastructure is fixed. So that kind of, and if that's the direction the council goes, I would say you probably don't want to TIF it then, because it creates a conflict of, if we want slow growth there, a TIF
Right.
wouldn't necessarily directly create more growth, but it would make it look more, it would send a message that we want growth in that area.
Right,
'cause
but
we
it
want
wouldn't
the-
be an incentive without the CEA.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right, but it could be designated for infrastructure too, so you
Yeah.
can begin to
I
pay
think
for
some
needed
that were
infrastructure.
concerned think that though a TIF does not mean a CEA, but it is a necessary prerequisite to a CEA. And so in doing so, you're kind of seeding, opening yourselves up for that request.
Mhm. We can make, right, we're talking economic development TIF districts, but we could also make an affordable housing TIF district, but that would not be,
Transit as well,
yeah.
another qualified one.
Because I think that's where, like, again, we haven't fully explored flexibility with TIFs. So again, if we, going back to our conversation, we were talking about, should there be certain parts of town we want affordable housing in? And those two properties that are in the Dunstan TIF, our Dunstan area, if we wanted to say just a TIF for affordable projects, then only affordable projects would qualify.
Right, you're limiting the use, that's the trade-off. And
Right.
to your question earlier, so far it hasn't hampered our ability to offset capital and operating costs.
Mhm.
But the trade-off is TIP dollars are limited in terms of what we can do with it.
Yeah.
Unlike general fund dollars, you can choose to spend them however you want.
But to the extent that there is going to be a lot of environmental infrastructure, it is a perfect tool for that. An affordable housing one wouldn't do the environmental infrastructure, but an economic development TIF would. And economic development infrastructure is as much part of community and economic development as anything else. So it could be a really good source of funds. I think the important thing, that as staff we want to communicate is, here's this tool for you. It has a lot of benefits, but you have to be the ones to decide, how do I want to use this? What do I want to use this for? And it is absolutely a tool to implement your comprehensive plan. So let's figure out what those types of things are and where TIF would be important
Yeah.
to capture some of that value.
I've
And can I ask, if the town wanted to make a TIF, could we say, in this TIF, we are not allowing
Sure.
CEAs, right? In the development program,
Yeah.
if by excluding it would mean it's not a qualified use, so that would prevent the run on people wanting to come. So
Yeah.
I think that,
Well, it would take away the fear you're describing kind of in the community, that it's a precursor to it.
yeah,
Yeah.
And I think there's some other things that I think we need to better explain, staff needs to better explain, like what in the TIF application is prescriptive versus what is just required by the application and an exercise that you do. And I think there is some confusion about, does the TIF control land use in any way? And the answer is no, it does not. You can put whatever projection you want to in there, but it's not, zoning controls your land use. So not the TIF. The TIF does not put any other layer of control or permission on the area that the TIF is being formed in.
mhm.
John,
I think they'll, go
on
ahead.
your idea of prescribing an area of town for affordable housing, you might run into some housing law issues on that where you can't. It's kind of like
Mm.
almost like a segregation, saying that this type of housing or this type of user of the housing is prescribed to that area. I ran into that in my previous life, where that you couldn't preordain what would around affordable housing, and particularly that was around kind of low income housing, federally funded low income housing.
Redlining.
Yeah, but
Redlining.
you can't have affordable housing as part of an economic development if you don't just have to have an affordable housing TIF. You can have an economic development TIF, whereas
Where you could
in
have it.
which you have
Right,
yeah.
Just the final thought I want to leave you with, I've struggled my whole career to find ways to simply convey these kind of complicated things that get conflated for obvious reasons. When it comes to the shelter benefit, the simplest way that I've come to think of it, and I'll see if you think it makes sense. I'm just looking at FY26 with the 22% shelter benefit. I think of it this way, that a TIF dollar is worth $1. A non-TIF dollar is worth 78 cents.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So I wonder if that's a way to get people just to kind of appreciate that there's one, a difference, and two, an economic benefit. So long as we can find qualified uses of TIF dollars.
Yeah. I think the bigger thing is being able to say, we're able to cover the CA payments with the TIF benefit. And again, I think that's partially why this tool exists, is to have CEAs that help to spur economic development that otherwise wouldn't have come. especially in like areas like that are really underdeveloped or areas that are, what is the word that they use to describe that?
Highlighted?
Yeah, where you want to do it. Like, I'm curious, like in Biddeford, when they did all the development of the paper mill, was that a CEA or a TIF in Biddeford?
I'm sure.
I'm sure it's a
both.
TIF. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's certainly a TIF, and I'm sure there was a CEA or two.
Because was that technically blighted and then?
I don't know the particulars,
Yeah.
honestly. Yeah, from an economic development point of view, the TIF itself, I don't know that it is an economic development tool. It's a tool for us to shelter value and not be penalized for growth. The CEA is really where I think the economic development piece is.
Yeah.
Because it's a conscious
Good point.
legal and financial relationship for, we're getting something out of it. We should never consider doing one where there's no benefit to us.
Mhm.
And I think the connotation is, it's just corporate welfare. And that's not the case. You should never do a CEA unless it makes sense to you.
But the way it is still an economic development pool is through the shelter benefit, like we can now fund infrastructure in that area that we otherwise
enough.
wouldn't have been able. So I do see it as
Right.
a tool still that helps us to be better off than we would be otherwise.
The state wants you to think of it like
Yeah.
that.
But the premise behind CEA is, but for
Yeah.
the assistance
Yeah.
you provide, I would not be making this investment. And you can, believe whether that's the case or not.
But it does get back to the fundamental difference between like the Higas Parkway TIF and the Downs TIF. And Higas Parkway, we paid for the infrastructure upfront and put it in, and then we paid ourselves back over time. And finally, it toward the end, it started to really perform. But with the Downs, we said, you guys pay for that. And if you do well and we'll pay you back through the CEA. But if they don't perform, if for some reason they put in all of that infrastructure, but they didn't have economic development or other types of development there, they wouldn't be getting very much money back, and that's on them, not on us. So that's the fundamental difference between those two styles of TIFs.
Mhm.
And
And that was that just a choice when they were negotiated, how we wanted to do it?
right, we wanted them to pay
Yeah.
for things.
Mhm.
We were still running a deficit in Higas Parkway. We
Yeah.
had debt service and there wasn't enough TIF revenues to pay it.
Why did we do the Haggis one that way? Were you guys here for that? Or was it
My
just?
time,
Yeah.
it was really viewed as, the vision was kind of a corporate center. There's still drawings, I think, up in
Oh, yeah.
Sitco's office that show these kind of idyllic, some 1970s vintage, that
Business
never came to
parks.
pass.
Yeah.
A little bit of like, if we build it, they will come.
Right,
Right, they
Right.
thought proximity to exit 42 and so on and so forth.
yeah, the connection between the industrial park and exit 42
Yeah.
was assumed, it's a reasonably
Yeah.
powerful economic development story. It just didn't happen to work out until the end, but we have paid ourselves back completely, right?
We have,
Yeah.
past councils made some decisions that drove away some businesses, Fairchild Semiconductor, there was a
TD Bank. I
TD
think.
Bank ultimately located up in Falmouth, just off Route 95. And I wasn't here and I don't, it's only urban legend, but,
Right,
and in the end, all we had was retail with Cabela's, which
Yeah.
Was not what was envisioned, I'll say.
All right. Well, thanks, Karen. That was great. I feel like TIFs are like cribbage in my lifetime. I've learned to play 4 separate times and seem not to retain the information.
Yeah.
it's okay, that's what my board said. They're like, every time we hear something like this, we learn something new, but you just have to keep repeating it to us each time.
Agreed.
And it's true for Tom and I too. We do that. And then, so we'll come back again when we get the final numbers after the commitment.
I just want to put out there that our next meeting is July 9th. Right this minute, I don't know what the agenda is, but I want to try to decide within 2 weeks if that's a meeting we need to have.
Well,
I would prefer not to have
ordinance
it
is not
if we
meeting in
can.
July.
Yeah. Neither is comms.
Actually, neither is
One,
comms.
2, 3,
soon. So,
I think John and I are, we're just.
We need July, I need
July.
July, I need July off.
and rather have August?
Yeah,
Yeah.
wait till August.
Okay.
Scratch.
Duly noted.
I mean, Tom can still come
Yeah.
and present. But
That's a good
You're
idea.
working on a 10-year capital plan.
yeah,
Yeah.
you guys can do that.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
In favor?
You're early.
Yeah. Need more.